Well, I think you all heard yesterday about Khushwant Singh telling the BBC crew to go away for being 30 minutes late. So in the spirit of Khushwant, we're going to keep you all to very strict timings today. Yesterday my timings were so vigorous I was called the Grim Reaper. It's not a nickname I want to keep, but I do think of me perhaps looming doom when you see me standing up at this corner if you're one of the speakers. Because we do need to keep our timings going. We have such wonderful panels. Yesterday was a fabulous day. You know, you come along to Lit Fest and I thought, I'll bring my laptop in case I get a bit bored and do a little bit of work, but I didn't even get it out of the bag yesterday. I was having such a blast. And today we're kicking off with an important anniversary, the Centenary of Jallianwalla. And we've got a fabulous panel here, chaired by Satvinder, Juss, who's Professor of Law at King's, and we were just talking, he's just been writing about the trial of Bagh, Singh, which I think I'm a Bollywood person, in case you weren't here yesterday, by the way, Rachel's Wire, and you know, many films about Bagh Singh, so very engaging for me. Satvinder, would you like to introduce the panel, or shall I just introduce them briefly? I'll let you introduce them. So, welcome to a great panel to start the day on a grim theme, but looking forward to hearing about your work. Thank you.
Well, good morning everyone, and just a couple of things. First and foremost, to welcome you on behalf of King's College London to this last gathering, the second Khushwant Singh Literary Festival. Two things I have to say is firstly this, that given that I work in the law school and teach here at King's College, Khushwant Singh came here in 1934 as an undergraduate. He claimed that Oxford and Cambridge did not happen because who would want someone with a third-class degree? Quite forgetting, of course, that in those days, to have a third-class degree was a mark of real accolade. It was known as a gentleman's degree. For the well-heeled and people of pedigree and class, anything that required a modicum of attention and energy was seen to be quite unseemly. And therefore, if you're a gentleman, you were content with a third-class degree. And so he came here, graduated in 1938, and then remarkably returned back to Lahore to practice at the Lahore Bar. And there are interviews of him subsequently in England where he explains how, although he has been visiting England over the years, and the countryside here, as you walk up the Yorkshire Dales to Wales and so on, is very, very beautiful, he claims. But when he arrived in Lahore the first time, he fell to the ground, kissed the floor, and tears filled in his eyes. And to this day, friends that I Lahore tell me that he was able to go to Lahore and say things that nobody else dared say coming from across the water. So a real giant of the man. And of course, after that, he went into the diplomatic service and went on to enter the illustrated reader of India, and the rest you all know of. So certainly we at the law school are very, very proud of having him here. On his 80th anniversary of having come to King's, the then principal civic trainer, together with the head of the India Studies, Sunil Kanani, actually travelled to his Delhi home to bestow upon him the highest accolade that King's could give, they the fellow. And there's a photograph of him, you know, in his bed with a blanket on him, and Rick Trainer with full garb, you know, presenting him with this fellowship together with Sunil Kanani. So I really cannot emphasize enough how proud we are to have him here at King's College. So that's my first point. My second point, of course, is that I have the good fortune, immense fortune to chair a distinguished panel of people who've done cutting-edge work on the Jallianwalla massacre. Kim Wagner, who wrote the book with a devastatingly simple title, Amandeep 1919, came out just at the start of the year, accompanied by an equally remarkable book by Amandeep, Madra and Singh. Remarkable because there are two ways of doing history. You can do high-flying history of the kind that we do in the ivory towers of academia. And there's of course history that you do which is accessible to the local population. And what they've always done is to make their work accessible. And so without further ado, I'm going to reintroduce Kim Wagner, Amandeep Madra and Parmjit Singh to to take just 5 minutes to begin with to sum up what it is that they set up to say in their books, and then really throw it open to the floor for questions. May I just say this, please? Do refrain from simply making bland statements. Engage with the work, engage with the speakers, ask questions, and develop the argument that way rather than simply making statements that are just free-standing. Right, thank you very much. Okay, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll say a few words about the thoughts and the work that went into the book. I saw my colleagues cashing in on the first World War Centenary maybe a decade ago. I thought, how can I do something similar? And so I got to a contract in 2013 and then forgot everything about it, and then all of a sudden 2019 came very close. I had originally thought of writing a global history and actually taking into consideration the context, which is quite often overlooked and at least not really considered. The Egyptian Revolution kicks off at the same time, the unrest in Ireland. Of course, they're there in the background, but what I originally thought I would do was this global comparative event and really situate the Amritsar massacre within a global context. And I ended up with quite the opposite, which was what I described as a micro-history of a global event, trying to have it both ways. And the more I worked on the primary materials, there's obviously an extensive literature on the subject, in a sense I pushed aside all the books that have been written about Amritsar, and I tried to immerse myself in the primary material. I went to the Punjab State Archives in Chandigarh, where I found a lot has been written about Amritsar, and the sources are well known: the Hunter Committee inquiry, the Indian National Congress inquiry, and I was desperate to find something new. But in Chandigarh, I found they had a collection of petitions written by families of residents of Amritsar who had been arrested after the riots of the 10th of April. And the petitions in of themselves were not particularly interesting, but at the end of each petition, there was entire trial records, which gives you sort of a micro, sort of a glimpse of the more intricate details of the events as they unfold in Amritsar at the time. And so they've never been used before, what I really tried to do was to slow down time in terms of the analysis and have each day be one chapter. And the 13th of April is actually 2 chapters. So that is the level of detail. Because everybody knows of Amritsar, everybody recognizes the word, the name Jallianwalla Bagh, but there's still so much that, in my opinion at least, remains unacknowledged or only sort of superficially recognized. And what I really wanted to do was put the reader in the middle of this chaos, and to the point that when General Dyer enters the garden and opens fire, the reader could actually, as problematic as it sounds, the reader could actually understand how he reasoned the way he did, but also why people would gather in the garden at this point of time, knowing fully well that the British might fire on them. And so I have to make this clear because some people misunderstand this, but to understand something or make sense of something is not the same as justifying it. And I'm quite adamant that you have to understand all people's motivations and the conflicting experiences. And I think one of the things I try to bring across is something that's, in narrative terms, slightly problematic, is how could the British in Amritsar in 1919 be fearing a second mutiny, 1847, when there was no mutiny, when you had Gandhi's non-violent mobilization against the radicals, and then have people having picnics at Jallianwalla Bagh, having political speeches, but not particularly anti-colonial ones. Nobody's talking about independence at this point in time. So what I really want to bring into one narrative form is how do people who are confronting each other actually not engage with each other, but rather to projections of their own fears or hopes. So we actually have, one of the things I found is the actual speeches that are given at Jallianwalla Bagh on the 13th of April, and they don't talk about independence, they don't talk about dominion status. They talk about the British government acting unjust in passing the Rowlatt Acts. They talk about the local authorities acting unjust by deporting the two political leaders, Kishore and Satvinder. So these are really quite almost banal types of protests that are going on the 13th in Jallianwalla Bagh, and yet you have General Dyer coming in and saying, oh, I have a, I've trapped a rebel army with bloodied swords, bent on attacking and overthrowing the Raj, and therefore I acted the way I did. So I think the key to understanding this particular event is to bring into light these almost incompatible experiences of events as they have unfolded. What else could I say? I guess in a larger perspective, I do frame the micro-narrative within the context of particular colonial mindset, which sort of is shaped by the, I guess you could say, trauma of 1857, but also within a broader theme of colonial violence within the British Empire. Because one of my main arguments is that this is not a freak event. Dyer was not a rogue officer playing off script, but that actually in this moment of crisis, we actually see the true nature of British rule in India and the Raj revealed in quite extraordinary terms. So one of the things I'm also trying to do is show how this was not a unique event, and that actually you can draw direct links to a whole range of types of fancy punishment, the way Dyer was treated afterwards. Of course, he was practically celebrated by conservatives and right-wing politicians in Britain back home. And I could continue talking, but I think I'll pass over to panelists.
It's wonderful. It's also very intimidating to try and follow that. So Satvinder, thank you very much for that very generous introduction. Thank you very much for coming along today. Just by way of introduction, my name's Amandeep. About 20 years ago, Parmjit and I started an organisation which has become the UK Punjab Heritage Association, and we've done lots of things since then. We've done things online, we've done some big public exhibitions which many of you may have attended at School of Oriental and African Studies, and we've started publishing. We've co-written 5 books ourselves, and if there's a theme that runs through those books, it's a search for the authentic in one form or another, which is kind of a high-minded ideal, and we do that largely through visual heritage in one form or another. Our exhibitions are very rich visually, our books have been as well. So with this centenary year on us, and with this wonderful association that we had with Kim, who is the authority on the story, it seemed really fitting to try to put together a visual heritage of what took place. It acts in 2 ways actually. It's a very accessible, this book I witnessed at Amrit is a very accessible way for people, as you said, common readers, if you like, to get into the story. But it also, I think, works as a really good companion piece to Kim's excellent book, because after you've read and absorbed that fantastic story, and it's very different to the story that often we are told. It's very different to the story that Attenborough presented just in a few minutes at the beginning of this film. When you've done that, you want to know the places, you want to know the faces of the people, you want to hear the voices of victims and perpetrators. And that's what we try to do in this book. This is a story, of course. Jallianwalla Bagh is a story that's been told by so many people. It's been politicised, of course, but it's been told by historians, it's been told by politicians, it's been told by filmmakers, artists. And what we seek to do in this book is to tell that story by people who were there. There are these extraordinary testimonies by victims and victims' families, which unearthed, he just breezed over the research that he's done to get to that point, where of course, he did a lot of work in unearthing it. It didn't find space, unfortunately, in his book, but there are also the politicians back at home, as well as, of course, the opposing voices back in India. And also we give it context as well, so what were those voices saying prior to the event, and what was the aftermath as well. And accompanying those are 100 or so photographic images which just immerse you into that space and that time.
How did you get massive photographs?
I'm sorry?
How did you get all those photographs?
Well, in a sense, that's kind of how we kind of bumped into each other, really, because we do have a long history of unearthing photography and artworks from colonial India, largely through British sources, and Kim was looking for some imagery for his book, and of course has done a lot of that work himself. So there was this wonderful archive from which to draw. The difficulty, of course, is which ones do you select to try to tell the story. So that's what we're trying to do now at Simon. So we're trying to tell that story through the eyes and through the voices of victims and perpetrators, and politicians, of commentators, but contemporary ones.
Just a couple of points, really. The first one is just, Amandeep and I are we're creators and authors of this book, right? In actual fact, the secret weapon that we had to draw upon was Kim. Because of all the research work he'd done, and he wasn't able to fit into a very academic sort of volume, and his publisher wasn't keen on expending too much money on extra page sections and all that sort of stuff. He came to us last year and said, look, I've got this material, it needs to see the light of day. And you know the saying, a picture speaks 1,000 words, it's actually 10,000 words is the original quote. And that's something that Amandeep and I have been doing for the last couple of decades, is trying to get the visual archives working in our favour to open up stories to people who would otherwise never know the stories. And in this particular instance, suffers from, there's myths that attach themselves to this story. And many of those Kim has educated us hugely on trying to unpick those, because if you've got the myth, I mean, that's the anathema to the story. We want to get to the root of this and find out not just what the truth was, but also where these myths come from. So we were incredibly fortunate to have Kim backing this work. Amandeep and I, we curated the material, wrote the introduction, and we wanted to make it as almost cinematic as possible. So if any budding film producers out there want to turn this into a film, they come and see us afterwards. But it does deserve that sort of treatment, because this goes on to the second point, actually. Why would we need to have another book on that particularly gruesome affair? So many books have been done. Kim's done a fantastic book, others have done so as well. And it seems to be something we are aware of. I mean, lots of Sikhs particularly, they go to Amritsar, and the second thing they do is they go into the Jallianwalla Bagh gardens, which is 100 meters away. So you'd expect people to know this story really well and carry it in a way that does justice to what happened to the victims and so on. But actually, people don't really know. Like Amandeep said, the Gandhi film, you see something and we accept that as fact, and that's kind of popular history, that's a popular story. But in actual fact, what happens is the layers of tradition and storytelling and politicizing the event cover lots and lots of things up, and they lead to this situation where, and this is something we're obviously going to cover today, the apology question comes up. Right? There's a demand for an apology. Who needs the apology? What's the point of an apology? What purpose does it serve? And what are we hoping to do with that apology? Right? And because there's so much myth and politics packed into this apology thing, from a historical perspective, we've got to be incredibly careful. We want to tell the truth, and wherever the truth leads us, we want that to be the path that should go in the future. And so we'll tackle the apology, I'm sure. There'll be lots of debate around that, but it's not a simple yes, there needs to be an apology, or no, there's no point having an apology. It's a very complicated situation that we find ourselves in. So I'll leave it there, and basically we'll look at.
Sums it up very neatly. I think with that, there's excellent summaries, and without further ado, throw it open to the floor. Any questions on those issues?
Hi. I want to ask whether the statute of limitation is applicable. Have we told so? In which case, if there was an apology.
Oh,
yeah, the question is whether the statute of limitations is applicable.
If there was an
so do you want to the microphone first, and then we'll get the full thing?
Thank you. I've heard from legal sources that the statute of limitation could be applicable here, because if, for example, the former slaves or the descendants of slaves applied for compensation, this compensatory effect of an apology would open the floodgates all over the world. Is that true in your view?
That's the one thing. I've heard through MPs that the compensation aspect is something that is of worry. In terms of, that's an addendum to the whole apology thing. What does it lead them into? There was compensation given at the time to families and so on, and people talk about that and the level of compensation given to Indian families versus the European families who've lost people from the family and businesses and so on, the disparity there. But in terms of statute of limitations, I mean, that's a legal thing.
Yeah, you're conflating two things here. There's a legal question of being able to sue in a court of law, and there the statute of limitations applies 6 years or 12 years or whatever it is. And that's irrelevant to the question of the apology, because that goes directly to the issue of reparations. Now, in the slave cases, in fact, if anything, the demand for reparations for everyone affected by slavery has been increasing, notwithstanding any statute, because it's based not on any statute of limitation, it's based simply on a kind of uncompensated for injustice that needs to be dealt with. And that can just simply be dealt with by virtue of the expiation payment. But the two other issues are different. Kim might want to deal with that.
So historical apologies, they're made on a legal basis or moral basis, and we often conflate the two. And of course, that leaves out the empirical basis. I don't think it's very useful or helpful to think of apologies and compensation in legal terms. Slavery was legal at the time it took place. General Dyer was technically asked to resign from the army. Relatives of the victims were compensated at the time. So legally, you could very easily make a case that there is no case to be made, and I don't think that should change the way we think about the past. Also, what if compensation was paid today, in whichever form, then what? Does it become less of an atrocity? And that's my real problem about an apology. What does an apology do today? If one is made, does that mean that the next centenary we celebrate the apology rather than the massacre? Right? People talk about bringing closure, healing wounds, moving on. Well, is that what we want? Do we want to bring closure and move on and forget about the past? Which is kind of what it entails. So I think the issue of an apology is far more problematic than we usually think. It seems straightforward that something bad happened and an apology should be made, but we don't think about what it actually does in the present, how an apology intervenes in history and becomes part of the history. Do we want the Amritsar massacre to be remembered as the Amritsar apology?
We have those.
First of all, could I congratulate Kim on his wonderful book on Amritsar. It's nice to see a young British historian not just deal with it as a single issue when we have, I know Kim will consider himself greater than 9 Ferguson, but he has a column in my own paper sometimes, and what they are saying and so on and so forth. But I think this thing about apology is very, very difficult. I personally come from, dare I say, an upper caste Hindu, not a Brahmin, but in Bengal we were Kulins, and when I went to East Bengal, Bangladesh, there were Muslims there who told me how my ancestors had oppressed them, and of course we oppressed the Dalits and so on. What do we apologize for? And I think what we need to do, there are two factors here. First of all, we need to recognize what has happened, and that recognition must come both from the Indians and the British. The Indians must recognize that millions of Indians collaborated. That was not the word the British used. The British used loyalism. But they collaborated. That included the Sikhs, that included my Bengali ancestors who were Jamindars and profited from the British, let's face that. And that's quite probably, I'm speaking English like this, and not speaking Bengali, but the fact is they did, millions did, and without that the British Empire would have lost a single day. Without the Sikh help, the revolt of 1857 would have crashed. And the fact is, I think, and a lot of British here now, like that great historian Rees-Mogg says, to acknowledge Rees-Mogg, let's have a round of applause for him, please. He might also run right list, but his historical evidence has been tremendous, that the empire was a force for good, and you read that, a lot of people, because the British haven't reconciled. I think that is the two reconciliations we need, and how we do that, I don't know, but not so much an apology, but to acknowledge what happened, and that the British Empire was not a 19th century NGO that went there because the Indians wrote a letter to the British saying, come and save us. You see, it was the other way around. Elizabeth wrote a letter to Emperor Wagner, got his name wrong, and got even his country wrong, saying, please allow our people to trade. So, we need to look at that entire thing. And whether we can do that or not now, I don't know.
I mean, don't forget that the asking and granting of apologies is very much now the order of the day. Emily Thornbury, Shadow Foreign Secretary, says that the British government should apologise to all the colonies. David Cameron has apologised for the stand that Margaret Thatcher took over apartheid South Africa. Cameron also apologised for the 130,000 orphans shipped off to Australia to be abused later on. So across the board, you're getting apologies. If that's the case, why is it improper for somebody who lives at number 45 down the gully in Amritsar to say, I grew up as a little child seeing my grandfather suffering day in, day out because he'd been shot in the leg, and to his dying day he wasn't able to speak about the massacre. I need an apology. Now, that of course is a very different request to the one that you did allude to, and that is a touchy subject. What about the collaborators? What about the fact that Sir Sundar Singh Majeethia, actually, who is the great-grandfather of Harsimrat Singh Kaur, the Bagh family, he, in fact, invited General Dyer to host a dinner for him the day after the massacre, went on in 1926 then to be knighted by the British government for loyalty to the King and Crown. What about the fact that Jathedar Arur Singh, who is the grandfather of Simranjit Maan, also a noted politician, in fact invited the next day General Dyer to give him a siropa at the Gurdwara. What about Captain Amrinder Singh's forefather, the Patiala Maharaja, who in fact used to come to Caxton Hall and wine and dine with O'Dwyer? Now these are collaborations at a very, very high level, to which no reference is made up whatsoever. I think the two are very, very distinct areas of asking for an apology.
Can I respond to those? You mentioned the rule saying, you called him Jathedar, he was a manager of the Golden Man, and that's, I'm not just picking at that. It's really important to know that, because he was in a position as a manager of the Golden Temple, a position that never existed for the British turned up and doesn't exist today, because it's an exercise in control. It's an exercise in political control over indigenous sort of power structures. In the same way that Kim lays out, you lay out colonial control over people, which sometimes spills out into these horrendous acts of violence, but there's also these other control structures that are in place. And in a sense, Jallianwalla has that theme about colonial control running all the way through it. So you've got Arur Singh in the weeks after the attack giving siropa to General Dyer. And in a sense, the lack of the apology, in my mind, the lack of the apology from the British government, in fact, it's really interesting watching all the ways that they don't say sorry. They kind of squirm and don't quite say. It's the last vestige of colonial control being exercised. It's in their power. The only gift they have left is the gift to apologise, whatever it may mean, whatever it may lead to. But it's their last bit of control, and they're desperately holding on to it. And it's fascinating to watch it.
Yeah, there's a question. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very interesting discussion, and I've been thinking about this question, so you're helping me. But I think what you just said, the last bit about that's all the last sort of gift that the British have, whatever the word you use. But I actually think we can go beyond that, picking up on the work that King's done and that you're doing. Perhaps getting that narrative right. I'm not for an apology, wherever it comes from. But I think more importantly is getting the narrative to be more true to what it is, not the colonial narrative, and getting it beyond academia and intellectual sort of circles to the schools. I mean, I didn't grow up here, I didn't study here, but my understanding is not taught properly in the schools. So when these are things that take a generation. When we know the truth, I think that would be a true apology.
That's something I wholeheartedly subscribe to. That the problem with an apology is once you do the apology, as Tim says, you've done it, and then it takes on a different form, and actually it's a get out of jail card in many ways for a government to say, okay, we've done it now, you don't have to do anything more. And the whole compensation thing will be kicked into the long grass and all that sort of stuff, right? So the key actually is to keep the story alive, be authentic, be truthful to it, and keep the voice alive in children and generation after generation, not as a wrench to whack kids in the head with and, you know, shove it down their throats, but it's just this whole opening up of, well, are empires ever good? You know, or are they ever, do empires only do bad? It's a massive question. And obviously we get some people who like to do the netting off of good and bad and say, overall it's really good, but when you break down, you know, the good bit and the bad bit, there's so many players, and one of the things we're going to touch upon is, you know, the aristocracy in India, for example, and in the Punjab question in particular. This Hindu, Sikh, Muslim aristocracy were the key layer of control that any empire, be it an Afghan empire, a Mughal empire, Sikh empire, British empire, whatever empire, they used the aristocracy to control the masses. And there's a brilliant example in, I think our friend Mr. Masari gave a quote from Transport yesterday. I don't know if it is, it's a footnote, by a guy called, there's a very sycophantic sort of address to the Viceroy coming to the Golden Temple in the 1880s. And this guy, his name was Man Singh. He was a military man under Ranjit Singh. When the Anglo-Sikh Wars came to an end in the annexation, he switched to the British side, became a key member of Hodgson's Horse, and had a big role to play in the mutiny, and it was probably his pistol that was used to shoot the sons of the Mughal Emperor. And then he became one of the managers of the Golden Temple of Amritsar, which Andy was alluding to. There's a wonderful photograph of him in the British Library next to another guy called Juss Singh, and they came from the same place, Jallianwalla, now in Pakistan. And there's a lovely bit of history about Juss Singh, which relates to this whole aristocracy thing, which was, he's from a family called the Man family, that's the surname. And it's known that when the Anglo-Sikh Wars were going on, the Man family sent half of their fighting men to one side and half to the other sides. For the obvious reason that whoever wins, we're going to be in for a chance. The others will be reconciled later on, we'll get them on board. But we'll still keep our ancestral lands and the jaggees and all that, you know, the salutes and the gold watches and the little presents and gifts. So the key is the aristocracy, understanding what role they played. The masses were, you know, at their mercy basically. They had no power. And let's not forget, at that time, like Kim said, no discussion about independence. They all believed that the sun is never going to set on the British Empire. That's why you have collaborator status, because they think, well, this is our life. The rest of our generation, next generation, what more can happen? So we've got to be careful about collaborator status as well, except when it comes to aristocrats. A couple of questions here.
I did disagree with it being an vestige of control, because I think, if anything, in today's climate, the UK is looking for more trade from India, more collaborations. I don't believe it's that. And actually, it brings me to the question of, do we expect apologies when they are from foreign countries? In 1984, has anyone apologised? I'm not aware that they have. We're not demanding that from our own government, so, or what if we are, we haven't had it. So is there more of a fuss made when it comes to our countries? I'm not apologising, well, I'm not condoning it, but I just think we must have the same standards for all.
May I just say something? I can't really see what the benefit of an apology is. You know, you mentioned earlier, right, that Cameron or whoever it was apologized on behalf of Margaret Thatcher for apartheid, right? So what? What I mean to say is, if you go to anybody who actually was inflicted by apartheid, right? I don't think they would give a damn about that apology, right? Because are we going to keep? You know, you go to the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, and what you see over there, right? Apology or no apology, still leaves you feeling absolutely shattered. If you go to anywhere where you see things on the Holocaust, right? Whether Germany apologized or not, right? It made absolutely zero difference to the people who suffered. I don't think they give a damn about these apologies. So all this apologizing, in my view, is a lot of political bullshit.
Just answer that question. An apology, which in fact, and like it's something that I often point out when I travel to India, how good we are in the West, in England, in America, at apologizing, saying I'm sorry I got reply to your email, I'm sorry this happened, saying thank you and so on, which is in fact not all too often done back in India. An apology has three functions, does it not, between you and I. First, the admission of guilt. Second, the fact that I have done you harm. And third, an implicit undertaking that I will not act in the same way again. Simply to say, on arrival, as James Cameron did in Madra, we regret this happened, it suggested that, well, look, we would just have done it slightly differently. But not to say that in fact what we did was wrong. And the final point, which you keep obscuring, is this. The fact that an apology was given by Cameron of the way in which Thatcher dealt with apartheid doesn't remove the sting of apartheid. The fact that 130,000 children were shipped off to Australia doesn't mean to say that that wrongdoing is in any way lessened by that. What it does is to recognize that people who wielded power at that point in time did wrong and recognize that they did wrong.
But we know that
We all know that, yeah. The question is,
they stopped short of their arrest.
The question is really, the grassroots level, on an individual basis, who gives a crap about politics done at a political level? Because that's two different worlds.
That's where we
That's
differ.
the issue.
That's where we differ. There was a question that
I can't understand why Daya was offered the Saropa by the Sikhs. It's very difficult to understand that.
I mean, Kim will answer, but I mean, obviously it was mentioned there was a collaboration at a very, very high level, and it's often been said about the people serving the empire, high ones, that a handful of these men, with their white gloves on horseback, went out there and ruled the biggest empire the world has ever seen. I grew up as a 10-year-old, these old maps where 2/3 of the world is covered in pink. How was it possible? It was possible because of collaborators. Salman Rushdie wrote an article many years ago where he begins the Times by saying, the chamcha is a very simple word, it means a spoon. And he said that the empire was actually run on the backs of these chamchas. But the fact that that happened does not lessen the fact that, as I was saying earlier, if you lived at number 45, and your grandfather had been shot down, you want an apology at your personal, individual level.
So this goes back to the heart of who was Arul Singh and what does it mean to give a Saropa at that particular time. Arul Singh was he was a plant, he was a political student, he was there. It's something that the British had done after 1849. They knew, there'd already been 2 wars, right? And they didn't want a third one. So what do? They stick someone in, one of their people, who's willing to keep an eye on that complex. They knew that is the site of any political uprising from the Sikhs. So they have to keep an eye on that. They put their own people in. Now, funnily enough, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who died 10 years before the Punjab was annexed, he had his own people placed in the Gom Temple complex because there was an independent body of Sikhs who basically said, we're the real Sikhs and we've made you who you are and given you all this empire, the Nihangs, they're known as. And in order to, have his way, he inserted his people. And it's just the way of rulers. Sikhs amongst themselves, just like everyone else, they've got complex power structures and politics going on internally. And Arul Singh is part of this tradition. He's basically somebody who is, figure a finger, he's called up. He's not going to do this as an independent act. He's going to do this because it's part of a show to keep the Sikh populace who will fall for the message, the propaganda, so that they don't get involved in what the Hindus and the Muslims are doing. And let's not forget, Amritsar in those days was 45% Muslim in terms of populace, 30-35% Hindu, 10% Sikh, and maybe 1% Christian. So the British are playing the classic divide and rule, which is what every empire does. It's not a British invention. Let's not give them the patent on that. It's the classic. It's what you would do if you're in power and you get a problem. You say, well, I'm going to carve these people up and make sure they don't get involved, and I've got a buffer there. Dyer famously did tours of villages and said, look, the Gom Temple's not been harmed. This is, riffraff. They're people who are causing problems. They're us, anti-you, the establishment that we're all part of. So the whole thing about Guru Singh representing Sikhs is a complete mistake. It's silly. It's like saying one chap represents Muslims or this chap represents Hindus. It's a complete misreading of the actual detail, and most people don't understand the history of the Sikhs enough to get to that level of detail. Like I said, George Singh, the guy we talked about yesterday, the British military guy, Man Singh he was a manager. That George Singh Man of the Man family, he was the first manager put in by the Sikhs. Actually, no, sorry, I lied. Man Singh, there's too many Man Singhs. Man Singh, his older brother was the first manager of the Golden Temple put in by the British. It's all, you know, there's a few close families, they all close ranks, and that's it. We want our thing forever, to go on forever and ever.
So you're saying people are so gullible that they just accept whatever the leadership puts down their throats?
More often than not, sadly. More often than not. Because the newspapers, information, who controls it? It's the people who have got, you know, the normal structures. In a village, for example, what the Panchayat, what the Sarpanch says, the head of the village council, the Panchayat, if they say you're doing this, you're doing it, otherwise you risk becoming an outcast, and that means you can't marry, you can't into certain families, you can't eat with them, and that is the death and destruction of an individual and their family for years to come, generations. So who the hell's got the gumption to go up against power structures like that, at that level, you know? And that's why they remember, they don't think the empire's ever going to make it.
Can I just make a statement on the Saropa? The Saropa, which was given to General Dyer at that time, was really given by the British government, because the Mahant at that time, were appointed by British government. They had nothing to do with what you know as STPC. So, in addition to the Saropa, people forget, Karan Thapar, leading journalist of India, his great-grandfather, Diwan Thapar, collected £125,000 at that time, and that was given to General Dyer along with the Saropa. Anyway, my question to Kim is, I read your book, very interesting book, very thoroughly investigated and researched. You mentioned that British government came very close to bombing Amritsar, and so much so that there were planes flying from Lahore over Amritsar at that time. And it wasn't, if it wasn't for the noble Englishman who was a principal of Khalsa College, perhaps it would have been more imminent. What do you think would have triggered to make it closeness to imminent?
Well, it's all about the British threat assessment, and the British are panicking at the time. They do throw bombs and use machine guns on crowds at Jallianwalla the day after the Amritsar massacre. They didn't want to bomb Amritsar because they knew that would alienate Sikh soldiers in British service for obvious reasons. But at the same time, they felt they were about to be overrun. So it's marginal decisions. And in many ways, you can see that's what leads to the massacre itself.
No, one is relieved that they never bombed it.
Of course.
But, it would have been unprecedented, an occurrence to really bomb locals.
Sorry, can I just add one point? Because you said it's unprecedented. I just want to respond to that. There was this really interesting press interview. I think it was an Outlook magazine on the 25th or 30th anniversary of the 1984 attack by the Indian Army on the Amritsar. And General Brass says in it, our soldiers went in and they were shot down, and then we sent in armored cars, but they couldn't get through. Then we sent in these tanks. And then he says, just a single sentence, he says, the Air Force was on standby. So, I mean, there's this escalation that's kind of going on in '84, which could have ended with it could have ended with
that. Bombing a city is different than bombarding a confined area. It's very different.
It's not in practical terms. If you bomb a city, you're going to kill a lot of people.
It's all within.
It's not a surgical strike.
This question to Kim. When you were researching, was there any element that surprised you in your research, and did it take you in another direction at all? Or just exploring something new?
I mean, I never got as thorough a sense of what local residents felt or believed. So, I mean, all you get is what's recorded in the police records and the nationalist narratives. But I was surprised by the extent to which the local population in Amritsar believed they were engaged in a completely legitimate negotiation with the British authorities, even after they'd been fired upon. So just before Dyer arrives, there's a reconnaissance airplane flying over Jallianwalla Bagh, and people are stirring and getting scared, and the speaker says, it's just a British reconnaissance airplane, they're not going to shoot at us. And then General Dyer turns up. And those are the nationalist leaders who are supposedly the agitators and the seditionists. So for me, it was very strange to see that, you know, up to the first shot is fired, people don't think the British are going to do it because it is unprecedented. This hasn't happened since 1857. So in living memory, why would they? People can't see that they're triggering the British the way they are, and that's one of the problems.
So Kim, can I ask something quickly, just internally? What about the Namdalis and what happened with Callan and the cannons?
Malaputla, 1862.
Yeah. How do you position that in this whole thing?
That is not something that is remembered outside Namdari circles, and even within, you know, British colonial history. So
the whole sense of did people expect that to be a response to that sort of act? That's this, you know, as a judicial execution in peacetime.
But the Namdaris at the time are seen as a small radical sect. Yeah. So I mean, they're perceived. You talked about the local elites, Maharaja Patiala. These people are deeply involved in that. So they're not seen as representative of India or of Sikhs by any means. But it's an event that's kind of, you know, pushed aside. British officers remember it, but it's not a real memory.
Good morning all. Excellent discussions all around. Just a couple of points going back. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that history is being taught the way it should be. This Jallianwalla Bagh episode 201. Dare I say it, but emphasis on the Holocaust is given a lot more publicity than on the massacres that have occurred in India, the famines that were initiated by so-called Churchill during the war in Bengal, where 6-7 million people died. You know. So my personal belief is that history should be taught the way it is, without any bias. And sadly, I suppose history is written in favor of the conqueror. They put it down the way they see it, and they want the people to see it as. It would be nice, you know, if it's written the way it should be. In terms of apologies, I don't see anything wrong why we should not get an apology. We've moved on now. Let's put things behind us and hopefully get to a more peaceful situation where humans treat humans as such. Life is important, but we need closure. Irrespective, we need closure. And coming back to the lady's point about the 84 riots and our own government not apologizing, let's face it, who was the government at that time? Why would they apologize? They were the instigators. They had their own people in there. When you have a potential prime minister candidate turning around and talking about, you know, when a tree falls, what happens? And that's a sad tragedy of India. Politics, hunger for power, people don't mean anything. Thank you.
History is important. Sorry, just on that very small point on that, the gentleman mentioned used the phrase Sikh riots, which is, you know, it's a propagandized term to describe what happened. Riot means there's two groups battling it out on the streets and so on, and it wasn't anything of the sort. So that language we have to be incredibly mindful of, and that's something we covered in a book we published a couple of years ago, it might make 4 years get the secret, was looking at this whole use of that phrase to kind of slightly say, well, actually it wasn't sort of genocidal massacres. which is what quite commonly works. So the use of the term Sikh riot is actually damaging history incredibly.
I don't see what an apology what result it will achieve. Who will apologize? People who are not even born there, something that their grandfather, great-grandfathers did. It happens all over the world. Apologize for apartheid, apologize for Holocaust, apologize for everything. It doesn't make any difference. I think the gentleman said something quite right. Let's work on something more important. Like, for example, return the Kohinoor, either to India or Pakistan, whatever. Or the Elgin marbles to the Greeks. Those things make sense. But apology, what the hell for?
Any other questions?
Sorry, can you hold the mic to your right, very good. Yeah, okay. Is that better? Brilliant, thank you. Right. Listening to this very interesting discussion, there's an area that hasn't been touched on, and that is how it was reported at the time, how it got to Britain at the time, and what happened to the journalist who had to, basically be suffered, was sent to jail for exposing what was going on. Now, I think when we talk about educating our children, we need to look at how countries and the elite respond to any exposure. And children need to know how to see past it. And for me, that is the most important part. But I'd like to hear what you've got to say. Okay. I ended up not a question, sorry.
I can sum up something. I think I agree largely with almost everything that's been said. That this is, you could very easily have an apology which is not a recognition of what happened, and which could, in a sense, gloss over the way it's told. And there was a debate in the House of Lords in February, which I watched, but you didn't have to, where the issue of an apology was brought up, but it was couched entirely by Churchill's quote. He talks about the massacre being isolated and unprecedented. And it actually, the response from the government who spoke to Baroness Goldie was that, oh yeah, it was really horrible. But as Churchill said, it's not the way the British Empire was. And the best, and this I'm quoting almost verbatim, the best way to commemorate the massacre is to ensure that Britain continues its global investment and prevention of corrupt dictatorships, something like that. So an apology can actually become a celebration of British exceptionalism, which is, I think, quite the opposite of what's intended. And that's why the issue of moral debt and these issues, they complicate and necessarily they distract from any real recognition. So I agree entirely. This needs to be taught differently. An apology, the issue of an apology actually stands in the way of that because it simplifies the past to an issue of perpetrator, victim, good, bad. It completely erases all complexities. But also, you're never going to get a British Conservative government to apologize in any meaningful way. So I think I'm not opposed to an apology. It could potentially lead to a broader debate. I think that's what we've seen in April of this year. But in and of itself, an apology is not enough.
Just a few thoughts. I was just thinking back in the summer of 18 when we first started collaborating and turned into this. I thought there would be two main themes of the debate, discussion around the Centenary. One would be around the apology, and the other one would be around numbers. Because that also seems to be a very contested area. How many people died? Which is a really kind of crude discussion to be having. And it's been really interesting what has dominated the debate in the Centenary year. It's not actually been the numbers at all. I think we'll be mature enough to sort of realise that it kind of doesn't matter. It's 379 or 479 or 879. The apology has been a dominant theme, but the other one, which is really encouraging, is this call, this desire for there to be better education around the colonial experience, including stories like Jallianwalla Bagh. And I hope that ends, it is the actual legacy of this centenary year, and it would be great with institutions like this, but also politically with at schools, where if the colonial experience was reflected in the school syllabus and was taught to children, because in a generation's time we won't be having some of the discussions that some of the very ill-informed discussions that we've had this year.
I'm fine.
Well, I think that brings us very nicely to the end for a most exhilarating and highly informative discussion. We seem to have focused entirely on the apology, except that the cause of that must be laid at the door of Parmjit, who's first at it. And I'm sure there'll be much more to discuss. Let me just say this very quickly. I mean, if this perhaps was a lawyer in me. In the law, what happens is that if you get, for example, some local authority that has neglected child abuse in Huddersfield or wherever it is, they're most reluctant to give an apology. Not because of the closure, it's quite the opposite. As soon as you give the apology, you recognize that in fact you were at fault, and bang, straight away, proceedings are issued and you're now to pay damages. And this happens whether it's a police constable of London, raiding a house in Brixton, of a black family or whatever. The apology is something that you dread most, because in fact it leads right to the opposite result. But I do entirely agree with Kingsbrook, which after all is about exactly the opposite, which is to say that what happened in Amritsar wasn't exceptionalism. So I entirely agree with it that if the apology was designed simply to say, in the Churchillian fashion, oh, actually we're much better than this, we are the people that Mother of Parliaments and the rule of law and so on, we would never do this wrong. It was some errant, a rogue general who went off and did this killing, but not us, cross our heart 3 times, we would never do a thing like that. That would be the one. Thank you very much for all that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I think the fact that we're talking about this issue today in a mixture of academic, literary, and other contexts, it's a sign that people are really talking, and so a great job. And I'm certainly, my head's reeling from that discussion this morning, and this idea of the apology, I think, has really been brought forward and discussed in a much more engaging way than I've heard usually. So thank you all very much for your contribution. Leaving the stage, just one question. My married name is Dwyer. I would like to point out I have my husband's family are no relation to any of the Dwyers in the Punjab. And in fact, I don't know if this is family mythology, but on my side of the family, my paternal grandfather was in a Punjab regiment, and it said that he left after 1919 because he was so disgusted. Because you have to remember the British were quite good at not being very good to people who are from within these islands as well sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you.